Okay, I think we can start. So I think almost all people are seated. So hello everyone. My name is Alexander Bankiev. I'm associate professor and co-chair of Ukrainian culture and ethnography at the Department of Modern Languages and Cultural Studies at the University of Alberta, and I'm also the director of Kule Folklore Center. The Kule Folklore Center is a leading research institution dedicated to the study of Ukrainian folklore, culture, traditions, and the everyday manifestations of identities. Both the Kule Folklore Center and the University of Alberta, located on Treaty 6 territory, the land of many indigenous peoples, and the homeland of Métis Nation. We respect the sovereignty, lands, histories, languages, knowledge systems, and culture of those nations. And today, as a part of the Kule lecture series, we are very honored to host Kyle Zeleny. Thank you for being with us. And with his presentation and with the lecture, the title of his presentation, Photographic Prairie Trilogy, Collective Identity, Personal Memory, and Arriving at the Ukrainian-Canadian Homeplace. Kyle Zeleny is a Canadian photographer, educator, and an author of four, books, photography collections. The first one is Out of West, Found Polaroids, Grown Ditch and the Prairie Castle, and Bury Me in the Back 40. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Alberta and master's in photography and urban cultures from Goldsmiths University and University of London, and PhD from the Joint Communication and Culture program at Toronto Metropolitan University and York University. His work has been exhibited internationally in 12 countries and featured in numerous publications, including the Globe and Mail, the Guardian, the Washington Post, Vice, Maclean's, and the Independent. And he is currently works as a session instructor at Grant MacEwan University. Kyler, the floor is yours.
Hello, good evening. Folks in the back, can you hear me? So that's going to be good, okay. A photographic prairie trilogy, collective identity, personal memory, and arriving at the Ukrainian-Canadian Homeplace. Let's simplify the title to a prairie home. It's a little bit more friendly, okay? First, I want to thank the Kule Center and the whole team. They've been great, and I appreciate them immensely for caring about the work, caring about the community that we have here in Alberta, and Kaffa as well for hosting. Thank you very much. And especially a big thank you to everyone here who have braved the first day of winter to come and hear me speak about small towns, and one town in particular, Mundare, Alberta. So today I'm going to be talking about my prairie trilogy. And this starts in 2012. So we have an evolution of a process that's taken 12 years, and it ends in, we can say 2024, although I still continue to make work on the prairies. But if we think about when this starts, this is, we have to think back to 2012, and we think of Donald Trump not as the President of the United States, but we think of Donald Trump as hosting the 5th season of The Celebrity Apprentice. So things have really changed in this time. And so we're going to go through these projects, and it's going to accumulate in the third one here, Bury Me in the Back 40, which I'll call Bury Me just for short. All three of these books were published by a Berlin-based publisher called The Velvet Cell. I have a good working relationship with them. And this whole process started very simply with a question that's now evolved into a trilogy, and has now become kind of my brand and focus. I've tried to kind of photograph outside of Western Canada. I've tried to make work in the United States, and largely have kind of failed. There seems to be something about this region, my home place, that seems to draw me back, to give me an interest and intrigue that I want to explore. But let's situate ourselves. We all know that we're in this map. We're in Western Canada. But I want to just kind of define the region, because I think there's some value in that. This is Western Canada. We're going to ignore Vancouver. We're just going to think about the rest of the space as kind of consisting of that. This is the way I like to view it. And there's value in thinking about this because often there's very few photographic exhibitions that we see in major galleries. There's very few festivals that exist in this space. There's very few internationally or nationally known image makers that come out of this space as well. And there's very few Canadian federal art grants that are awarded to artists within this space. This is a vast region with a lot of culture, a lot of history, a lot of ideas, a lot of people that has very little coverage. So my pitch is that it makes work like this all the more worthwhile because there's very few of us actually doing it within Western Canada. Okay, this is just a bit of an overlay of the UK to kind of drive that point home and how little, it's like if we're thinking about size, how little is really represented or how little representation we see within this region. And this is also, interestingly enough, this is my first public lecture within Edmonton and the second one that I've ever done in Alberta. Although this is one that I've done a fair bit in other places, Toronto, Texas, Georgia, Norway, but never really in our own space. So once again, very happy to be here, very happy to be invited by the center to give this talk because it's something that for whatever reason, I've been putting off. Yeah, but let's just kind of continue. This is more of the boring stuff. It's a little hard to see, but there is supposed to be a map of Canada there. Some projectors aren't the best for this type of thing, but that is just the lower lands of the prairie. You can see that red that actually represents Alberta and Saskatchewan. This is just kind of to explain or drive home the point that there's different ways to describe the idea of the prairies, and sometimes they exist without border. That's North America. It's dipping also into the United States. This is showing up a little bit better. Let's think about the prairie provinces from a geographical perspective or political division, maybe just as this, but another way to think about them is simply as an idea. We can think about the prairies the same way that we can think about the American West or the American South. We have kind of a good conception, if we're devourers of modern media, of what the American South looks like. We have a good idea of what the American West looks like. Maybe not so much about the prairies unless we're from here. So I'm just going to quickly go through volumes 1 and 2, and then we're going to spend more time on the third final volume, Bury Me. Going back to the Apprentice 5th season here, 2012. This was a limited edition and it did quite well. This was just my first art book, which was special. And it was really simply about documenting rural communities in Western Canada with a population of 1,000 or less. I'm from one of these communities. We're going to talk about it in a bit. And through this project, I visited over 100. And there was simply starting by asking this question of what state are rural communities in. So it essentially became like a very ethnographic visual survey of rural communities. It was partly based on this premise that we have a region the size of North America and no one seems to know what we're about. So there's a couple of reasons, and if you look at critical Canadian studies, one concept is that we lack idols. Another one is that we perceive ourselves based on this idea of the fence. So what do I mean by that? Simply, we look to the United States, we look south, we peer over to see how they're describing us for us to understand how we should then describe ourselves. And we often see this in parody. We see it a lot in comedy, where we take the way that the Americans see us and we make it funny. But through that, we also make it slightly true. So I think there's a reason to also, I love the jokes, that's great, but we also have to assert and develop our own kind of Canadian cultural identity, especially in the West. One maybe not based on separation, division, maybe one that is a little bit more loving. But that's like its own kind of talk. We'll just leave that away and out of the space. So as you can see, there's a number down below here. And so in that book, one thing that I wanted to do was not use the name of the community because I felt like that was a bit of a fetishization of the community itself. And then also, secondly, the population will then draw attention to the rather, I don't like to use the word, but I will, insignificantness of these communities in these spaces, because they're not insignificant for the people that dwell there, the people that do commerce there, but largely for other areas outside of them, they are not seen really as valuable spaces. And so this work was, kind of the first large project that I did. And it was about looking at people through their absence. There's about 35 images in the book, and we only actually see the inclusion of 3 individuals. This is one of them. And at this point, we've already kind of photographed 100 communities. But also the complexity with doing this is Western Canada, I think we're all very aware, quite large. And what these communities end up representing, because of the distance between them, is just these little tiny dots in between. So you can drive a couple hours and photograph maybe 1 or 2 communities that have a total population of 400 people. It also felt like a little incomplete, which leads to the next volume, the next project, Ditch The Prairie Castle. And what do I mean by incomplete is there's this idea that in the first book was very much about looking at space and communities, but it really leaves out the importance of landscape as a connector and the people that make both the communities and the landscape speak. Another thing that I decided to do was stop looking at very small towns and look at towns that are slightly larger. So this threshold changes from 1,000 to 10,000. We start to look at still rural communities, but maybe hubs of commerce in Alberta and Saskatchewan. And also using what would maybe be called a nodal perspective or a network theory to think about these places. Because it's not only about the towns, it's about the areas around them, as I've said, right? And also the people that live in the spaces and live outside of those spaces. So this work really becomes about looking at community through the idea of landscape and people, and then moving between these towns, these little dots that we saw in volume 1. And I want to talk a little bit about titles, because in the art book world, we're a little preoccupied with titles. This one is Ditch The Prairie Castle. Does anyone know what a prairie castle is? Is it a what? Grain elevator? Yeah, so they're just grain elevators. They're also called prairie sentinels. They're also called prairie cathedrals by some academics that have a little bit of a poetic tinge to them. And it's often the first thing that you go to a small town you encounter. They are the small town skyscraper. They're also the hub of information and commerce historically. They've now been kind of, pulled away from the communities. They've gone to larger hubs that exist outside of them. And so this, as actually a form, is something that is rather, under threat. And then if we want to extrapolate that, we can think about that, maybe this is a metaphor for a way of life that's under threat in general. So the title, Ditch The Prairie Castle, I think we're understanding the Prairie Castle part, crown and ditch. Is anyone familiar with that conception? This is a little bit obscure, but it's quite interesting, I think. There was a story that was told to me in a bar in the South. We'll just say the South. We won't say where. And they said, I'll get a crown and ditch. And I asked the fellow ordering the drink at the bar, what is a crown and ditch? And he says, well, you order a Crown and Coke, Crown Royal and Coke, and then you hit the ditch. And I think there was, it's something that in the bar space everyone laughs at. There's comedy to it. But then we also very quickly find out that there's a fair bit of tragedy. So the next day when I left that community and I can see in the daylight, we found that there was, 7 crosses. And those 7 crosses represent 7 lost lives on this highway. It became a little darker. And then you continue on 10, 15 minutes, you'd see more crosses. And so this was a real reality represented. And I thought there was just something really kind of poetic about the way I understand the prairies, and we'll get into it in the third book, is this place of peace and tragedy, this happiness that also holds a fair bit of sadness. And I think that's also something that's indicative not just of the prairies, but of all complex places. So I want to just quickly go back to this idea of thinking about our neighbors to the south and the importance that they play in the way that we think about ourselves to the north. And a concept that I like to think about is this idea of American cultural hegemony, this idea that America is a hegemonic power. They exert themselves globally. They have a pull, they have a magnetism, a cultural magnetism, a political magnetism, a military magnetism, and we have to be the closest neighbors to them. And so we end up extrapolating a lot of the way that we see ourselves, like that fence concept, based on them. Another kind of concept within Canadian cultural studies is this idea of from colony to nation back to colony. This idea that our foundations is based on this British and French mixture of colony, that we've moved to be a nation. Some say maybe a postmodern nation, but we're actually maybe potentially then sliding back into this concept of being a colony to the United States. And this is definitely heightened with the rhetoric that we're currently seeing from season 5 Celebrity Apprentice host Donald Trump. I ran out of time. I wanted to prepare and actually find out who was on season 5. So if anyone wants to Google that quickly and tell me. No, please don't. Right. Anyways, what's the point of all this rambling? It's just once again to kind of drive home this importance of asserting our own culture, whether that be national or regional or local. But I want to talk about some of the specific things around this project now, so we're going to take a little bit of a turn. This is the traditional prairie landscape. It's been described as God's country, big sky country, vastness. It's been described as empty. It's been described with and without possibility. Largely, it's a narrative apt for imperialist pursuits and for the colonial settler, which I am one of. And this is in some ways you might argue this is an extension of that, but it starts over 150 years ago with a photographer named Humphrey Heim, one of the first individuals to come to the prairies. I said first, but he's the first. He comes to the prairies as part of one of these westward expeditions. He then takes back these images of the prairies, and what we see here is this idea of a vastness and emptiness, which is a bit problematic, this idea of erasure, because there are people that belong to this space, but the images that we're seeing is you see a blank canvas essentially, but you see land that you can kind of draw upon. So what gives this space life? What gives landscape meaning is people. So this second volume is largely about this idea of thinking about the people that make and the landscape sing. So it's about reciprocity, symbolic relationships. What we have here is the dino bone seeker from Drumheller. He's going out and trying to find dinosaur bones. I think they just made a kind of a large discovery not too long ago, so keep digging, old man, you might be able to find something. We have Judy, who along the Cowboy Highway, which is Highway 22, is speaking with God as she picks up garbage for the next generation. We have Ernie, the small town Saskatchewan bookseller, who, although his books and the spines that sit outside on the table might be bleached, he himself has quite a bit of a tan. And so this project was really just to drive it home, this idea of looking at larger communities, but also the people and landscapes that make them real. Landscape is nothing without people that can tell the story, build a story around it. But as a self-criticism, and this leads to the next project, is there's this problem of me meeting strangers very briefly, having small but valuable conversations and interactions, but nothing longful or meaningful. So to remedy this, we move to Volume 3, and Volume 3 becomes something a bit more about just general storytelling. So now we're at Volume 3 here. So this becomes a long-term creative inquiry, is the way I've described it, and essentially just one specific prairie community under the microscope. This was a project that, as you can see, from 2015 to 24, took almost 10 years. Largely not because I'm lazy, maybe I was a little busy, but it's largely or mostly because it's hard to photograph your home place. Others might be better at it. I find that there's a lot of tension in that. I also think that the tension is part of the work. And it's also a project that has no end date and can kind of continue on in perpetuity forever. But eventually you got to make a decision, and myself and the publisher, made this decision that we thought it'd be better out in the world than to live in a drawer. And I still photograph in the community, so the saga continues. One quick slide that's a little bit self-promoting. I brought a few books with me. They're over there. These are for perusing. Also, if someone wants to steal one, they can. Largely, they're also for purchase. So if anyone wants to purchase one, that would be the preferred method of taking a book home with you. And you can do that after. And just come up to me and we'll figure it out. I can take an e-transfer, and I don't even need you to send me the money right now. I see a space of trust here. But if anyone is interested in a book, I think we're about 98% sold out. The publisher has 10 copies. I have that remaining essentially. So that's it. It's a limited edition book. So once it is gone, it is gone. And if folks don't want to be purchasing one today, there's a few bookstores that still carry it in Edmonton. The AGA has one copy. Porchlight Books has one copy. And Audrey's on 104th. No, sorry, not 104th. Jasper has one copy too. And that's it. That's the last of the self-promotion. Yeah, so this work is a little bit more complex compared to the others. Those would probably be maybe considered more straight documentary photography. This embraces something a little different. Joan Funky-Berta is a Spanish artist and theorist. I think his theory is better than his art. That's not a knock to his art. His theory is just very good. So he has informed this concept called post-photography that folks in my space, in the documentary or creative art space, should have a very good understanding of, which often they don't. But he came up with this concept that photography is the original cell. You can call it the primordial soup, or he calls it the primordial soup, that all other media forms are derived from. And so there's some significant advantage and value to the idea of the photograph. Post-photography means that essentially we've kind of moved past the photo. We're into this new space, this new phase. And he's writing prior to AI, before DALL-E, before chat, and all these operative AI texts that can kind of produce and build images to infinity. So his work has, I think, now even more meaning. And this should or does or will have photographers, image makers rethinking their practice, okay? And this also makes me think about this concept called Vemodalen. And I've taken this definition from the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, which is a great title. We're going to talk about titles again, but we should acknowledge a good title there. And there's this concept of the frustration of photographing something when thousands of identical photos have already existed of the same object, the same sunset, the same waterfall, the same curve of a hip, the same close-up of an eye, which can in turn a unique subject into something hollow and pulpy and cheap, like a mass-produced piece of furniture you happen to have assembled yourself. I think he's talking about IKEA. Vemodalen essentially means we've photographed everything to affinity. And so from a photographic perspective, from those that are engaging with the practice, what I've interpreted this to mean is that we have to move past the idea of being photographers and focus more on this concept of being storytellers. But let's backtrack a little bit. So this is a spread from the book. We're going to look at a number of spreads. This is Mundare. There's two images here. We are focusing on the grain elevators because this is an important thing to focus on, especially early on in the book and in the talk, because it's the first thing that we see when we come to the communities. And we actually, if we look over here, that's where the homestead is. So I'm very much a local of the community, but not from the community. But what I was interested in regards to the community, I photographed a little bit outside. Because once again, we're thinking about this idea of nodal. The importance of the place is not the place itself, it's also the interaction with the folks, the landscape, commerce outside of it that come into it. And so I was interested in two things: what the community wants to be and what it is. And those are different things, and they're different things to every single individual as well. Is anyone familiar with the concept of boosterism? So boosterism was something that was commonly used, especially in the early 20th century. It was used by individuals in politics, in transport, who were trying to get Europeans to come settle the prairies. And then it was also used by the early settlers that came to the prairies. Essentially what it would be, boosterism is just a way of supporting your community. It's about having a good community spirit. So you would go to a piece of land and it would look very flat and boring, and maybe it wasn't very nice, and maybe it was minus 30 in February, but you'd still write back to your relatives in Ukraine or Poland, and you would still say, this is a great place, you should definitely come here, bring all your money, and bring everyone, this is amazing. And we'll talk about why that's important in a little bit, but I became then interested in how locals thought about sharing their stories amongst themselves, but then also outsiders, and how those stories are different, and how the stories a local will tell another local is different from the story that a local will tell a stranger. The work also becomes about my, what I would call maybe complex love-hate relationship with maybe that's a little harsh. I feel complexity towards these places, but I also continue to drive home to them and to work and do work and to photograph there. There is a bit of a spiritual conflict for me in these towns, or this town specifically, but I think there's also, an extension of that. I think there's an existential conflict for the community itself, this idea of what it wishes to be, but what it is. As we see cities like Edmonton grow, even Grand Prairie, Red Deer, Calgary, we see our small towns shrink, and we see this across the prairies. And if they're not shrinking, they're aging. And if they're not gaining services, they're losing services. So I wanted to think about, because a lot of the way that I was posturing or thinking about the communities, this fellow looks familiar, that's my dad, if anyone was wondering. This is really a conversation, beyond a layering, it's a conversation between different time periods. And so I found this book, Memories of Mundare, and it's not like I discovered that these are very common in the community. And every community had one of this. This was developed in 1980, which is the 75th anniversary of the province. So everyone, and especially the government over, was very excited and decided to give money to all the towns to produce these books. What it essentially is, if anyone hasn't come across one, it's a community history. It compiles the institutions of the town or the community, but largely it's family histories. And this becomes a form of what we call history from below. It's also a form of self-censorship, because what you write into that will be read by the entire community. So you can't say that you are the best farmer in the community, because everyone will then know if you A, are, or B, are not. No, I don't think I've never read the whole thing. It's very big. Yeah, it's like 600 pages. But it's this is very much a Ukrainian community, to the point that it doesn't take long for someone to go through this and understand that the last names, the Boychuks, the Senechis, the Ferminuks, are very much of Eastern European heritage, or that's where they're coming from. We'll get to the end of the book eventually as I'm flipping through. There it is. That's a map of Ukraine, which is also very indicative of how Ukrainian this community is, or how closely they felt to their heritage, and for how long they've also maintained that heritage, because early settlers coming to that space would have been about 130 years ago. To this day, still a large representation of Ukrainian heritage there, although at the same time that's changing. So this work, it's maybe a little hard, especially for the folks in the back, but these are essentially just kind of like screenshots of the book. These are pages from that book, and you can see there's text below, which is from that history book from 1980, if that's not clear to anyone. And there's a lot of ways to describe this work. You can describe it as revisionist history, layered history, expanded documentary, reimagining history. It's a project that, as I've said, could have no end, and hence kind of knowing when to call it. But the real value in doing this type of work is this is someone's hometown. This is my hometown. So there's the Jamaican saying, dance in your backyard first. Apparently it's the thing that I did last, but eventually I did do it. Another thing that we like to use as a concept within relational ethics is this idea of no research until all dogs are known. And you have to do that. It takes a lot of time, but if you're an insider or a known individual to a community, it's a little easier and faster. And so this book is a bunch of things, and it uses a bunch of elements to achieve a bunch of things. That's the aim, at least. So what we see here is, or we'll see as we go through the slides, archival images, found objects, and also my own photographic practice in different layers as a way to kind of explore and express changes over time in this community. And so we're essentially layering things. We're layering history and ideas as a way to, we're not trying to be objective, we're trying to be emotive. The other two works were a little bit more objective, and this is supposed to be emotional. There's supposed to be an elicitation of emotion with this, or as Deborah Pools calls the concept, the aesthetics of the gut. We're supposed to feel it in the gut. Roland Barthes would probably call it the idea of being pricked by an image. And this is a key tenet of something called arts-based research, which this work belongs to, I would say, because it was birthed out of an institution. And arts-based research, ABR for short, is essentially a fancy term for academics who want to play artist at the same time. So, but this play is a really important part of this work as well. And I think as we get older, and I don't feel old, but I'm definitely older than I was in 2012 when Donald Trump was hosting the 5th season of The Celebrity Apprentice. Play is really important, and trying to return to play is really important. So this work was largely about that as a way to kind of muck around, play, get in the sandbox, and also to avoid this thing that Truman Capote's biographer Gerald Clark called the imprisonment of the barbed wire of fact. This idea that we don't need to be constrained by fact. We can maybe feel and move into a bit of emotion. And so this was just an example of me trying to play around with that. She doesn't look very happy. What if we layer individuals? Can we end up with a smile? A little bit of a smile. And this idea of collage is not new or groundbreaking. This is photographer Danny Lyon's work, which is decades old. And collage itself is a very old and established medium. Starts with, maybe you can say, Wisconsin Death Trip. And then this is another example of collage. Danny Lyon's work. If anyone knows his work around the bike riders, there was recently a film. He's a great documentary maker. And so here we have the Holy Bible. Although it's not the Holy Bible, this was produced in 2013. And it's about the idea of reappropriating the Bible by two artists in 2013. And it won a large prize called the German prize. It's this very large photo prize. And so this idea of layering images on well-known texts, cultural texts, like a phone book or a Bible or a community book that every community had in 1980 is not a new thing. This is another example. There's two here, actually. On the left, Alejandro Carragera, an amazing Spanish-Mexican artist, produced a Dummy's Guide to Home Ownership. He just really had quite a large show. And then on the right is Christian Patterson, who uses his community's phone book. It's called Fond du Lac, Bottom of the Lake, and that's his small town. I've chatted with him. He describes it as a small town. It has 40,000 people, so I think we have a slight definition difference. And yeah, so we're going back to Bury Me. It's a mixture of collage and mixed media. And so it's also, as we see here in these spreads, it's meant to be a space where ideas and images and faces kind of collide to create a new meaning, which we sometimes call a third meaning, although we usually associate that with text. We'll talk about it in a little bit. But the concept is that we're taking something existing, we're adding something to it, and it's producing something new and novel, something we didn't have before. Here we have one of those types of spreads from the book. On the right-hand side, we see some Ukrainian Pasenka images. And this is, if you were to do a survey of people in Mundare, it's a town of 850 individuals, how many people are speaking Ukrainian daily? Might be near zero. Maybe 20 people. But we still see these elements. And this is what Philip Cook calls this idea of the residual nature of Canadian-Ukrainian identity. And it's very pronounced within what is a very large, if not the largest outside of Ukraine or Russia, largest Ukrainian diaspora in the world. Is based within Canada. In the region of Mundare, Vegreville, St. Paul is very much an indicative hot pocket of that. And so the work also became, once again, about this idea of play, collecting and modifying objects from the community. That is a Ukrainian Pasenka, modified, crushed, and then placed over a casket. A little bit morbid, but it fits within the narrative. So one of those eggs, which is, I think, for me, this is one of the images that It's very studio-esque on the right-hand side. I don't love it as an image itself, but I love the concept behind it. Is essentially we have 3 Ukrainian eggs nestled within the nest of twine that you would see if you were a farmer or a baler. And that was something I found on the family farm. So collecting objects and making things, making ink out of things from the community was part of this project as well. Very much about, collecting and modifying. So, there might be someone in the audience, I'm not sure, but they might be wondering, what's the point of doing this layered history? And I'll use the words of a spatial theorist, Doreen Massey, to kind of help me with that. And Doreen Massey said that the past of a place is open to a multiplicity of readings, as is the present. So what Doreen is essentially saying is every public account of place is in competition with other accounts. And place is essentially then a site for struggle. It's a place that we get to modify. We get to rethink about the way that we think about places in a contemporary sense, but then also historically as well. Revisionist history is a good way to describe that. So there's a reason to include these historical images from the community. And it's also a great way to give images another life. This idea of thinking of them not as dead letters, but active documents. It allows for a pluralization of a narrative. We're allowing other types of media to kind of come into the narrative. I'm still very much a conductor. This is still very much a work of a place of the mind, we might want to call it. But we get to include the production, the works of other individuals as a way to kind of help focus us on this site of Mundare being a site of inquiry, thinking about the community itself in a new and novel way. And so what we end up with, potentially, is this idea of a critical community album, something that's a little bit more real than what we saw in 1980, that talks about some of the darkness. You can call it a community diary, or maybe potentially, if it's more personified or about me specifically, it's my community diary. But at the minimum, it's supposed to be a conversation between the past and the present. I'm not sure if you can see that in the back, but this is 2 spreads. That's a little blown out. But on the left, out west, on the right is Ditch The Prairie Castle. They're both some essays that are included. A big part of the work that I do is about including text. Because, I don't know, maybe I'm not that good of a photographer, so maybe if I use text, we can kind of get the whole meaning figured out there. But also, putting them together, as I've mentioned before, is this idea of creating a third meaning. Is when images are present, we have a text, we review both, we have a new meaning, a third meaning, a third reading comes from this. And so in the first book, which is out west, there's a couple writers, including myself. There's Dr. Craig Campbell and Ginger Strand, who's an American writer. So I wanted to have more of a pluralism to the voices. Crown Ditch features an essay by myself and also Aretha Van Herk, if anyone knows who that is. She's a great prairie writer based in Calgary, at the University of Calgary. And finally, we end up with just Bury Me in the Back 40 being my voice, this honing of voices to be mine, talking about my community, this idea that I'm kind of an insider who thinks like an outsider, and I'm attempting to balance this idea of lived experience in the community with learned knowledge outside of the community, being trained externally, and coming back with those ideas. And so one of the things that I was thinking about or trying to think around is this idea of the complexity of place. And I thought the dichotomy of using alcohol might be something of function. This idea that alcohol has played an important role within this community, and we can kind of have a conversation around is this specific to a Ukrainian-settler community, or do all European cultures at their base seem to be and think that they're the best drinkers and everyone's drinking heavily. So, looking through the archives that I collected from this community, which I would just ask to go into people's homes, some that I knew, some that I didn't, and I would just ask to collect their photos. A common theme was this idea of the bottle, of celebration around a drink. And even the beloved family matriarch, Baba Jane, can be spotted indulging with 6 bottles. She hasn't drank in years, but I love to show her this photo every once in a while and say, I know what you were. You're not a saint, not always. Now you are, maybe. And so this is from the essay in the book, Bury Me in the Back 40. So Franz Kafka believed that the only books worth reading were those that could profoundly affect us, as if they were wounding or stabbing. I discovered that alcohol has been metaphorically wounding small towns on the prairies ever since their inception. And so, alcohol has acted as a social process for community building. It's also been a highly destructive element that has wounded the community deeply. It's one of my favorite photos that I've collected. Just two guys next to the chicken coop drinking some moonshine. And so there's a lot of stories that come out. If anyone's gone to the antics of drinking and have had a night out, there's a lot of knowledge for locals, at least the details of these stories that we kind of talk about over rye and Coke. If you start having some drinks with some locals and they start letting you in some information about Mundare, they'll tell you that at one point there was two moonshiners with wooden legs, and one would hide their shine actually in the wooden leg. My grandparents used to be moonshiners, allegedly, until one of them almost burnt down one of the buildings. They don't like to talk about which building it was. But this was an important part of the early 20th century culture of these kind of communities, at least Mundare, and this idea that shiners themselves, moonshiners, weren't really looked down, they weren't looked down upon or pitied. They were kind of seen as outlaws, these hustlers trying to make it work on the thin prairie. But at some point, there's this idea of drugs that become kind of more common. So we move from this substance that has at least a community building aspect to it. And we see that within other cultures as well, this idea of if you share drinks with someone, you do bond with them. Hard drugs, not so much, maybe a little different. And what we do see in the last 10 to 15 years is hard drugs kind of do emerge within the community. This isn't something that is unique to Mundare. This is occurring to many towns across North America. And it's largely always present and quite devastating. And locals will also tell you, I remember having a conversation with one individual and they said, well, we were talking about someone and they said, well, they just kind of disappeared, but they're not part of the local history because they were into drugs. And these communities are going through a phase of transition, I guess we can say. What community doesn't go through it or isn't always perpetually in a form of transition, but this one seems to be quite heavy, where in the last year we've seen at least two houses where there was house fires and we found bodies within that community, like within the houses in the community. Kind of underscores the point a little bit that places are many things and places sometimes can reveal themselves slowly. And this work is meant to be about that, this idea of releasing itself slowly. It's supposed to be full of riddles with wording, images, and objects that the keen observer may understand, or the local, but maybe not those that are outside of the community, and possibly not even the locals themselves. And I found, and a couple people have messaged me, something I didn't think about is this idea of the frustration people would have wanting to read what's underneath the images. And one person even emailed me and said, I don't understand how I'm supposed to read this. There's images over top. I said, are you frustrated? They said, yeah, a little. I'm like, that's the point. But it's layering of history. You're not supposed to know everything. That's the conception. You're not given all this information. You can work towards it. You can work to some of it. But you're not a local. You're not supposed to know it all. It might be a little hard for those to see in the back, but anyone closer know what those are? Donuts, okay. What?
Poczki.
Poczki?
Poczki. Donuts in Ukrainian Polish.
We have some Ukrainians in the audience. Probably more than one, I think, though. Thank you. So they are donuts. They're what I used to call co-op donuts. If anyone's familiar with that concept, every small town, they have great donuts. This is, to me, a great donut. I'm not a fan of whatever they sell in Edmonton that's an $8 donut. It seems ludicrous to me. But what I've noticed through doing this work, and this is why we do visual ethnography, is the change in how it's described. This used to be considered a co-op donut. Now it's considered a funeral donut. And that's the way that people are starting to talk about it. So that language is changing. And that language is kind of important. And we see that we're having more funerals than we're having celebration or town halls where we would traditionally see the co-op donuts. We still know that they're from the co-op, but we see them often at funerals. And so this work, kind of continuing on that, is it's supposed to be about friction, frustration, and guarded knowledge. There's at times I've kind of alluded that this isn't for everyone, not at the same time. You have to do the work to understand this. This is a bit of a local onlys mentality. At times, this is obviously supposed to be something that very much a grab, maybe buy a copy of. And, if you work hard enough, you can work towards knowledge. You can work towards a new understanding of a prairie home that's complicated. But through that process, it might feel a little bit, there might be a little bit of visual fatigue. And that's by design. It's supposed to be overwhelming. It's maybe supposed to be ugly at times. It should be moving and emotive. It should be pricking you, as Barth would say. It should be heavy. At the end of the day, we're kind of holding the weight of a community, or trying to in this work. There should be, some anxiety inherent in it as well. Maybe that's just for me as a producer. But I wanted to encapsulate this idea of what it meant to go back to your home place. And we don't have one, most of us. Some of us maybe have moved around a bit and need something different. But for those that have had an anchor for a long period of time, that plane ride, that drive into your community can feel, you feel more than just happiness. You feel complexity, and that's also the magic of a place. And it should be illuminating. One phrase is to light a candle means to cast a shadow. And we do this, so the work is meant to, it's produced and shared as a new way of seeing an old place. Maybe a place that hasn't been given a lot of thought. I mean, we're all kind of gathered here on what I consider the first day of winter, and I appreciate you all for being here, talking about a place called Mundare, and I don't think most folks would have spent some time with me, an hour or so, thinking about one small community. And so I wanted to give this place, my home place, I wanted to make it complex, I wanted to give it nuance, I wanted to try to celebrate it with all of its complexity. That includes a number of things. That includes the good folks and the helpful neighbors that are there. It also means the suicides, the overdoses, and the house fires. The concept is, in order to see the rose, you must also then respect the thorns that are attached to it. And we love the rose, but it has thorns, and sometimes we try to clip them, but maybe we don't need to. They're part of that object. So building on that rose analogy, a truly complex place is both good and bad, and now we're getting back into the titles. I wanted that title to kind of signify both. And as I said before, the idea of titles is really important for our book makers or art practitioners. We want to have a fancy, fun title. But I kept coming back to this spiritual idea of the back 40. And who's familiar with the concept of the back 40? A couple people. So it's historically the land behind the farmhouse. There's different ways to think about it, but it's connected. It's the space behind the house. It has a higher value. It may not be turned over for farming. Ours wasn't. It was used as a pasture. We can see it here in the next slide. There'll be a bunch of slides about it. But here is some quotes by a photographer named Alex Soth, who is our generation's most important photographer. They're doing the type of work that I'm doing. And he's come up with some amazing titles called Sleeping by the Mississippi and Songbook and A Pound of Pictures. And so, he also writes on photography very briefly, but he has, and what he says is profound. So what we have here is, I'll read it quickly. Men think about sex every 7 seconds, but I think about project titles. There's no greater pleasure than lying on a couch, closing my eyes, and daydreaming about the perfect title. Sometimes photographers get corny. David Heath's Dialogue with Solitude is an example, but I'd rather have a corny title than a boring one. And so, I don't know, I'll self-critique so you don't have to, but bury me in the back 40 is a little corny. But the space itself was so hard to pass up, and it felt too spiritual. And so, I mean, part of it is because I wanted a title that felt warm, but also felt like it was a warning. Yeah? And so this idea of the back 40 becomes this metaphor for my favorite kind of place, which is one that I hold in equal esteem and distaste. A place where ideas of love and hate can build and kind of battle themselves out. And this seems to be a common theme for small town folks who have left, which I sometimes, maybe we overuse this word, but I'll use it here, nostalgia. We have nostalgia for these places. After we leave, we have to leave in order to feel nostalgia. And so for me, it was also important to kind of think about what that meant critically, and not only to be nostalgic, but to think about the idea of revising or revisioning the sense of place, because places are active, is what I'm trying to express here. And so Homeplace, like this, are where we kind of go to visit past memories, past people that we photograph there. And this is also where we go to make new memories, both the good and the bad. And I never know really how to end these talks, so I kind of will just finish with a quote that's from the book itself. And so this is simply a story being recorded, recollected, and reconfigured, a layered portrait of a small town living that is both unique and universal, the result of which is a stoicism of place, a lived existence which roars at times and suffers so quietly at others. Thank you.
Okay, so before we open the floor, Kyler, thank you for really so provoking presentation. And I remember that on my second trip to Alberta, it was 2012, I explored prairies through photography. I was a part of the project actually documenting all churches outside of Edmonton, and it was my way of actually knowing how actually the culture of Ukrainians and the prairies is outside of Edmonton. Yeah? But my question is, I want to actually use my privilege as the host of this evening and to pose my first question, because the presentation and your book, because first time when I actually looked through the book, flipped through the book, I had the same question as you mentioned, that I didn't know that it is a collage. Yes, that this is actually the layer under the layer, the layer, the layer. So there are so many layers that you use that book about Mundare as a layer to actually to showcase different photographs. Yes, historical ones, your own photographs. Yes, and the layers, they are different. They are different about different communities, and Mundare for our personal view is really Ukrainian, one. But because you are a photographer, you are using different metaphors. Yes, you are zooming in, you are zooming out. So you are not only looking at Ukrainian community, but you are looking at different communities, different generations, different waves, how the communities have been affected by different cultural things that have happened in Canada and in the world. Yeah. How that actually zooming in and zooming out, and those layers help you to look at your own identity. First of all, Ukrainian identity and the identity that is to be a part of Mundare. Yeah. So how you does it help you actually to rediscover or to look at your own identity from a completely different angle?
Yeah. Okay. So I didn't think about it this way until recently. This is almost a form of therapy that I get to share with other people. So this is me trying to understand my relationship to this community, but I know that I'm not alone. I know that every farm kid, every townie, that once they got old enough would often leave these communities. And this is something that I think I've noticed within my work as a conversation piece over the years is folks will say, I'm from X community, I moved to X city, I understand your work. And I don't think everyone understands what it's like to grow up on the prairies. And so I I'm still trying to understand my relationship to this community because I'm an insider, I'm an outsider at the same time. I'm probably more, when this started, I was living in Toronto, so I was more of an outsider and I didn't have as close a tie to the community, but now I do. I work in the community. I visit the community, I have family in the community, so I'm there every week. I don't know if that really answers it, but this was a way for me to make sense of a place and use my training, which is maybe I've gotten too much, we went to the level of PhD to figure this out. But to use that as a way to understand home for myself, but then really for, like, this book is, let's say it's for everyone in the room. I think multiple audiences is important. I think when you're producing something, you should think about having a multitude of audiences. But this book primarily is for folks that have come from small communities and left them. And feel, because I think you can also have this feeling if you stay in those communities, but I think small towns are these really beautiful things, and this is the way that I perceive it, where you want them to do well, but sometimes they're not always doing well, and then you end up having these complex feelings towards them. You have things that you don't like about a place and things that you love, that you cherish, and that's what also then makes these places very special. That's what makes them home. So my way of going through this project was to try to understand my relationship to this community that keeps pulling me back. I mentioned the idea of magnetism that I have towards the prairies. It keeps drawing me back. And at the epicenter of that is Mundare. If I grew up in a city, I don't know if I'd be doing any of this work, but I grew up in a small town and felt called to try to understand what it meant to have a relationship to this kind of place. And it's still an ongoing process. So I don't have a clear answer because the fun thing is it's ongoing. And there's still, I'm now doing hopefully a project about my family's farm that we've had for over 100 years. Is probably kind of maybe the next positioning, or it's still, maybe we're actually shrinking more to the home. We're going from not only community to maybe the actual farmyard, but I'll leave it at that. I don't know if you want this back. Do you have other questions?
Yeah, I can continue using my power today, but also note that the audience has also some questions. So, and if you have any questions, so please raise your hand. Yeah.
You had talked about landscape and really focusing on the people that embody and take up that landscape. But I understand landscape to be through a specific view. That landscape requires an observation from someone rather than the place or the space that people are taking up. So since you were talking about being that outsider or that insider, I wonder if you have reflected on your, view of landscape. Is it an insider view or is it an outsider view?
So from an academic perspective, it's a spectrum. And there's, I was teaching about this not too long ago, but I forget the name of the individual, but it's 1958 that they come up with this spectrum. And I think it's a good question. I don't know if it is an insider, outsider, or we're both, or we're embodying different positions at different times. The concept is that you're generally not one thing at all times, and you kind of can move. So I feel more of an insider to Mundare, but if I'm going to be looking at landscape outside of the region, then I feel like more of an outsider. But I still feel like I have a base of understanding growing up, being A-trained, and then also be growing up inside one of these communities. So when I think about the photographs that we might have looked at in Bury Me, well, let's go back a little bit. Think about the photographs that I would have taken as part of Out West, the first book. I feel more of an outsider that understands the space because of training and because of familiarity with a very similar landscape. If we go into looking at Bury Me in the Back 40, I feel more of an insider. And so I think that also gives me more license. And we see this in the narrative where in Ditch The Prairie Castle, that is a work that does focus more so on landscape. I'm trying to engage with individuals so that I can then interpret their understanding of landscape and how they view themselves within that landscape. What we end up seeing in Bury Me in the Back 40 is more of a personal narrative because I feel more ownership as an insider. And I think the more of an insider you feel to be, the more voice you might generally have. if that kind of answers it. So throughout my practice, we've kind of seen this movement towards me relying less on outsiders' views and ideas and more so on my own kind of perceptions, feelings, emotions, and history. And then also, still trying to balance that with the history of the community itself and using interviews and archives to kind of achieve that. Yeah. Does that answer it?
Yeah, I'm happy.
Okay.
Yeah, I have 2 questions, just simple questions. What is the back 40? Is it called back 40 acres of farm?
Yeah, and so it's been a while since I've read up on this, so feel free, anyone in the audience, to correct me. I don't mind being wrong in front of a crowd. But historically, farms would be granted either 80 or 160 acres, and then it would generally, the farmhouse would be kind of epicenter, because then you're closest to all the sections, and then the back 40 would often be used as pasture or place maybe for your chicken coop, your barns, etc. And so the back 40 is part of the farmyard that isn't always necessarily farmed land. Yeah.
What kind of farm does your family have?
We had cattle. We still do grain. Both my grandparents are in this work because I'm photographing the community, but I'm also photographing people close to me. So I wonder if we can actually see. Let's pay a little homage to the great Grandpa Zeleny here. So many slides. We went through 85 slides. Everyone, no one fell asleep. It was great. Maybe it's not here. Oh, no, it is. That's Grandpa Zeleny, and he's 88 years old. And so he farmed with my father for decades and is only now retired, whatever that means. He still seems to be helping out, but he's, 88. And so they were largely grain farmers and also did cattle for a long time until they realized that unlike the Coulter wall song, it's not great to have cattle around all the time.
I really enjoyed the 4 inserts, the small sheets of pink paper with the poems and your struggle with home. And because everything in this book, I find it fascinating. I've read and reread and leave it for a couple of months and come back, and there's a freshness. Anyways, today when I was looking at it, I saw at the back that there are the titles, water, bales, dirt, roads, and then there's a series of numbers. So what's that all about? I'm sure it's there for a reason.
Would I have put something in there if it had no meaning? Maybe. What do they call it? A red herring? Or no, you're very astute. I think I should buy you a drink after this. I was going to include that in the presentation, but I realized that I didn't think we could handle more than 85 slides. That would have taken up maybe 5 to explain. So those are all coordinates, and they correspond to the words, so bale and water. And if you... And this is, I've never told anyone this, so we're all getting to be surprised and learn about it together. If you plot those coordinates and then you draw an X through them, if you connect them, it actually makes a spot where they connect. It's a bit of a treasure map. And the actual site, I think I took the slide out, but where those poems rest, we end up seeing, what is, I'll describe it, a power line, right? In 4 different seasons. And that power line is that X on that map. Yeah.
I knew it. Like I knew there was a significance. Okay, so there's T.S. Eliot that you've included, but then there's other poems.
Mm-hmm.
So where are they from?
Oh, I don't know that. You gotta wait till the next talk for that one. Those some of the poems, some of them might be poems. They're like, it's kind of written. It's supposed to be obscure as to who's sending or speaking in that sense to me. So I don't want to give that away, but I will say that where that power line is, we can't see it. That is the spread. You can see the lines for those that are close, and there is on the left-hand side that power line. There may or may not be something positioned or buried there that has relevance to this work. Yeah. You might want to get if anyone's going to dig anything up, they might want to get permission from the landholder, which is Rob Zeleny.
I like what you said about boosterism. I thought that's really interesting. So I was curious what the locals think, or your family have reacted to your work.
Are you welcome? I still welcome.
Yeah, they haven't pitchforked me out. I have a series of I don't know, I thought it would be kind of fun, but there's a number of individuals within the work. Also, one thing that's kind of sad is you do this long enough, you see people that are in the images pass away. And so also, which is an indicator kind of like it really drives home the importance of doing this work now, because if we don't do it now, we maybe potentially don't have the ability to do it later. We don't have the ability to. There was an individual named I can't think of his first name, but his last name was Shallist, and he was like a Holocaust survivor, and he lived in town, and he would every day he'd go and gamble at the corner pub, and my baba would sometimes ask me to go drive him home because he didn't have a car and he was like 80. And I never got a chance to really photograph him. It's one of those individuals who's now passed on. But, luckily here's Charlie Gargas. He was the mayor, I think, at the time, or he would have been the mayor prior to this time. So anyways, what am I rambling on about? I have a series of these individuals that are in the book holding the book. So if I need to, I can say, see, they don't hate it. I would say, I don't know, that generally the opinion of, maybe there's some locals here that could speak to it, but it's meant to be complex. I went to the town initially as part of like a town hall meeting, and I said, I'm doing this work and I just want you to know what it's about, because I'm not trying to blindside anyone, and I still really like this community, but I think we need to have some critical thinking around it, or there should be some complexity. That's just what I want to do as an artist. But historically they've been, so far no one's said anything negative. The closest thing to someone being negative was one comment where someone said that I had plagiarized the work. And they were saying that I had plagiarized the book from 1980, which was created by this Mundare a historical society that doesn't exist anymore, because this was a god-awful 45 years ago or whatever. And so there is no way, and it's also collage, so legally I'm fine. Morally, ethically, there might be like other questions. Legally, I was fine, but that seemed to be kind of their issue. So to my understanding, I don't know how many people in the community itself have looked at the work or know that this even exists. I don't know if that's my failing. The local library has a copy. That's great. So they were excited. But there hasn't really been anything too negative. And that was honestly like always my biggest concern, was misrepresenting someone or something and including a story that I shouldn't have. And sometimes we have names in the book. I don't have a problem with, like, in the essay that I wrote, we have names, and sometimes we don't, because we know that certain people still live in that community, and the idea of someone's suicide out in the short wheat is not something we need to provide a name for. So I tried to be as respectful as possible, but also try to meet what I thought were my intentions of really showing the complexity of place. So, as I said, no one's pitchforked me yet. I still go over there every week, so. Yeah.
Can I get the microphone?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, my question is, basically listening to this presentation, I happen to think a really critical point, and I'm curious if you can reflect on the point I will make. I'm from Ukrainian studies. I'm a PhD. I'm one of the graduates of the Folklore Center. All right. I was in a fieldwork in Crimea back in 2013, a few months before the Russian occupation, and I was interviewing Russian Cossacks. One of the questions I was asking them is that how you define yourself as legitimate claimants of the territory. You have no history in Crimea. This is not your native land. And one of the Russian Cossacks was answering me. He was saying, wherever we go, wherever we step in is our own land. You don't have any troubles legitimizing ourselves in this land. In the beginning of the presentation, 2 times the land recognition was mentioned. Parts of it, at least, was uttered, which recognizes.
Sorry, the what?
In the beginning of your presentation and introduction, if I'm not wrong, the land recognition was voiced, and there it goes that we recognize the homeland. That these territories are the homelands of the natives, of the indigenous people. And then the conversation turned around how the homemaking, as the title goes, and the identities of the communities you mentioned are involved. How do you reflect on the question of your homemaking while we are using the land recognition formula, while we are recognizing this is the home of somebody else? How do you yourself square this up? The same question applies to the Russian Cossack that I was talking to. So our focus is your feeling of home, your definition of home, how you are documenting this home while we are recognizing this home is somebody else's home.
So I can probably start by saying I don't have a good answer. That's a big and heavy question. I think it's also a question that with some slight happiness is one that we're asking ourselves that we weren't asking ourselves 20 years ago or 15 years ago. We wouldn't have been doing land recognitions at all. I don't really have a good answer for it. This is, I'm trying to do a project around a community that also doesn't have close relations with Indigenous individuals. If this was, say, a project around St. Paul that is surrounded by Indigenous reserves, the complexity of it, I think, would be quite different. I'm not in any way denying or discounting the fact that this is Indigenous land and space. If anything, I would love to be able to say that I've gone forward with some sort of, which I have, an idea and respect, but I would like to be able to do more than that. But just specifically speaking about Mundare, there seems to be, and I've used words like erasure as well around the idea of the colonial settler. Like I'm very evident within this work as part of a colonial settler heritage and history. And there is erasure. We've seen that in most, maybe astutely highlighted in Humphrey's photo. I don't have a great answer for that. I actually would be interested to see if you have a better one. I just have an understanding of what this community is and how history has been written around it, and how we actually don't have any close Indigenous individuals. And part of that has to do with a terrible history of erasure that started with, Humphrey and other surveyors coming to the west and demarcating land that was already occupied and removing individuals from it. I'm not sure if you want to end, if you want to provide.
We can talk separately after.
Okay, yeah.
Steven.
I'm curious, at what points in your life did you realize that you had a strong photographic artistic voice? Was there a moment in time when you understood that you had a strong voice that was worthwhile to share with the world? And the second part of the question is, at what point did you realize that you could make a living doing what you
Make a living, yeah. So I'll answer the second question first. I respect anyone who is in this space who makes a living. I don't know too many people that do. So I have a 9 to 5, and I do this now as a creative outlet, or as I'm in some ways getting paid for this in X, Y, and Z ways, and you hustle. So it maybe is a part-time job, but I have yet to decide to jump myself fully into the practice of doing documentary artwork full-time as a lucrative undertaking. So if you're looking for advice on that, I can't give you it, and I also don't know very many documentary photographers who can kind of make that claim. So I think it also speaks to the fact that this is done because there's heart and love and admiration for this type of work. We're not doing it to make money. The first question kind of implies a bit of almost a compliment that you're giving me, in that I have the ability to create good images. I think I just work hard. I don't think I'm actually that good of an image maker. But when did I think that some of the images were being taken seriously or had value? I guess after kind of the first book came out. I'd been photographing very terribly for a number of years before that. I think training is a good part of that process. I think collecting and looking at art books, not that you have to buy any art books, but the local stacks of the universities here are quite full of them, and you can just kind of walk in and access them, is a great way. It's not really the answer to your question, but I don't know, I think anyone who's doing this struggles with trying to figure out if they are still making good work. Are they ever making good work? But I would say if I had to give an answer, is probably when I did the first book and the reception was really positive and people wanted to purchase the work. I think that's really special and profound, yeah.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions.
In your preamble, did you say you were down in Texas and Georgia?
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm curious about what the reason for you going there. Was it by invitation? Did they want to learn about how you did what you did? Were they trying to find some parallels in their neck of the woods? And what do they know about Mundare now that they didn't before?
Oh, they know it.
Or do they care?
They know everything about Mundare now. At least this is one narrative, right? This is another thing too, is 850 people live there and maybe another 1,000 live within the area. They all have their own narrative of place. I just have the privilege to be able to share mine with a group of people and to make images as a way to do it. I was in both places because I was traveling through and I knew people at institutions. And so Craig Campbell, who wrote in the first book, Out West, who was a professor at the University of Alberta and he taught, I think, in sociology. It was a cultural studies course, or the sociology of culture, something along the lines of that. I took that class with him and then we developed a relationship. So when I was going through, he asked if I can speak with his graduate students. And then in Georgia, something quite similar where they have SCAD, which is a really well-known art school, private art school in Savannah. And they also they asked if I can kind of come and speak as well. Yeah. And now they know everything about Mundare. And I don't know if they care or not, but it's small little victories because I care about this region. I care about its complexity. I care about it having its own culture, its own folk, and that people know. And so it's nice to speak here, absolutely, but it's also nice to speak with people that don't know what Edmonton is. So, yeah.
We have time for 1 more question. Yeah.
So you spent some time, talking about titles. You even had a big list of titles. What do you think? When you break a list of titles, what are you looking for? What's the goal, or how do you know when you have the correct title? When you write that list, what are you searching for? And then the second part, what are you hoping the audience gets from the title?
Yeah, so that's my colleague and someone I work with, Ian, and we've as soon as I started showing these slides about title, I thought about Ian because him and I have had conversations about titles, and so these weren't included for you, but I knew that you'd be thinking about them. What am I trying to do with the title? How do I think it's a feeling. I feel like titles feel like music, where when there's the right beat, it just fits, it hits, the beat goes with the lyric and then that's it. Maybe it doesn't always go that way. So, there's definitely some terrible titles here that this is the list of where we're trying to get to. And we arrive somewhere else. I don't even want to keep them up on the screen too long in case people start looking at them closely. But this is intimate that I share this because this is process, and sometimes we don't want to share parts of those processes. because we might feel a little silly about them. What do I want the reader, the potential viewer? I want them to, we're trying to set a title that may somehow, I think, reflect the work. At the same time that you want that title to have intrigue. I personally think that there should be a title with a little bit of poetics, and there's nothing wrong with that. A very matter-of-fact title also kind of works, but I think it's without magic or call it lyricism. So the idea of out west is that it's very descriptive. It is out west. I was living in the United Kingdom, and I went out west to photograph, which is a fine title, but I don't think it has the same lyricism and allure as something like Bury Me in the Back 40. Yeah. Good.
Okay. Thank you, Kyler. Thank you for being with us today. And before we wrap up, so some announcements about other future events, because the Kule Folklore Center will host 2 more events this year before the new year. And the second event is going to be online event. It's going to be on Zoom. And the title of that event, Ukrainian Winter Celebrations, Who Brings Presents to Ukrainian Children? So, register, so if you actually want to know who is bringing those presents. And the event is going to be on December 12th, so at 10 a.m. and it will be delivered by Daria and Sibor. So please register. And one day after, we have another event which will be hosted at Straskolna Community League Hall, and this is going to be just some social event. This is Christmas Carol singing along event. And also for those people who are interested in exploring more about Ukrainian culture and the question about Ukrainian indigenous Ukrainian relations, this is something that we are doing in cooperation with URDC, Ukrainian Resource and Development Center at McEwen University, and we have the director of that center with us, yes, Larissa. And we just hosted a really successful event yesterday, exploring those complexities, exploring those layers, and this is something that I'm finding a little bit probably like weird and mysterious, just because the question of home, this week I have actually been asked this third time. Yes, so on Monday I was delivering a guest lecture at the anthropology department for the graduate class, and 1 hour we devoted actually discussing the notion of home. Physical, emotional home, and the different complexities that are surrounding that notion. So if you wanted to explore more about the relations, so please also register with us, and we are planning to do more events and on this issue. So, and thank you for being with us. Thank you.